bayan ng San Diego sa paghahanda para sa pista. Makikita ang kasiyahan sa paligid. May mga dekorasyon, musika at mga paputok. Abala rin si Ibarra sa pagpapatayo ng paaralan na inaasahang magiging simbolo ng pag-unlad ng bayan. Isang engranding handaan ang ginanap sa bahay ni Kapitan Tiago, kung saan ipinagmamalaki niya si Ibarra bilang panauhin. Ipinagkaloob ni Kapitan Tiago kay Maria Clara ang isang mamahaling lakit bilang regalo. Nailathala sa pahayagan ng mga kaganapan sa pista ng San Diego. Si Maria Clara, na nag-aalala sa hindi pagpapakita ni Ibarra, ay sumulat ng liham sa kanya upang ipahayag ang kanyang pag-aalala. Maagang nagising ang mga mamamayan dahil sa musika at paputok. Nagkaroon ng prosesyon ng mga santo at santa na nagtapos sa tapat ng bahay ni Kapitan Tiago. Si Peloso Potasio ay hindi sumang-ayon sa magarbong pagdiriwang na itinuturing niyang pag-aaksaya. Maraming tao ang dumalo sa misa sa simbahan. Si Padre Damaso ang nagsermon kung saan inilahad niya ang kanyang pananaw sa mga makasalanan at ang kahalagahan ng pananampalataya. Isang kindat ang inukol ng pari kay Ibarra habang isang palibak na tingin naman kay Padre Martin. Ipinagpatuloy ni Padre Damaso ang kanyang sermon sa wikang Latin at Tagalog, na puno ng pananakot sa mga makasalanan, pagpaparinig sa mga kaaway tulad ni Ibarra at pagpuri sa kanyang sarili. Ito ay nagdulot ng iba't ibang reaksyon at tensyon mula sa mga tagapakinig. Nagkaroon ng insidente sa simbahan kung saan nahulog ang isang bahagi ng dekorasyon na nagdulot ng kaguluhan sa mga tao. Ito ay naging simbolo ng kahinaan ng mga institusyong panrelihiyon. Nag-usap sina Ibarra at Elias tungkol sa mga suliranin ng bayan. Ipinahayag ni Elias ang kanyang mga pananaw sa kalayaan at katarungan, habang si Ibarra ay naniniwala sa reforma sa pamamagitan ng edukasyon. Nagdaos ng pananghalian sina Kapitan Tiago na dinaluhan ng mga kilalang tao sa bayan. Sa kabila ng kasayahan, may mga tensyon sa pagitan ng mga panauhin, lalo na sa pagitan ni Ibarra at Padre Damaso. Kumalat ang tsismis tungkol sa mga kaganapan sa pista at sa mga panauhin. Ang mga usap-usapan ay nagdulot ng iba't ibang reaksyon mula sa mga mamamayan ng San Diego. Naharap si Ibarra sa kanyang unang suliranin kaugnay ng pagpapatayo ng paaralan. May mga hadlang mula sa simbahan at sa pamahalaan na naglalayong pigilan ang kanyang proyekto. Ang kanyang relasyon din ay nanganganib sa pakikialam ni Padre Damaso. Nakipagkita si Ibarra sa Kapitan General upang humingi ng tulong sa kanyang proyekto. Ipinahayag ng Kapitan General ang kanyang suporta kay Ibarra at ang kanyang kagustuhang tulungan siya. Isang prosesyon ang ginanap sa gabi na dinaluhan ng mga mamamayan. Habang pinapanood ni Ibarra ang prosesyon, narinig niya ang isang awit na nagdulot sa kanya ng lungkot at pag-aalala.
The first theme is religious devotion and piety. The people of San Diego demonstrate profound religious devotion through their active participation in communal religious celebrations. In Chapter 26, the Fiesta preparations reveal a meaningful blend of spiritual commitment and festive celebration. This continues in Chapter 29, where the community's faith is evident through their impressive turnout for the fiesta and enthusiastic participation in various religious activities, including processions, mass attendance, and the ritual lighting of candles. In Chapter 30, this deep devotion is further emphasized. The people's endurance of an overcrowded church to attend Mass and their willingness to pay a significant sum for the priest's sermon underscores the profound value they place on religious observance and perceived spiritual benefits. In Chapter 33, faith is portrayed on a more personal level. Elias' unwavering faith in God, even when facing hardship and betrayal from society, showcases a strong commitment to his religious beliefs. This depicts how faith becomes a refuge for those who feel betrayed by society. Similarly, in Chapter 36, Maria Clara instinctively turns to prayer as her primary source of comfort and guidance when faced with the sorrow of breaking her engagement with Ibarra. This shows piety, where prayer is not merely a ritual, but a natural and immediate response to emotional distress, reflecting a profound reliance on faith in God. Finally, in chapter 38, the grand religious procession with its elaborate decorations of different religious figures and performances, such as Maria Clara singing of the Ave Maria, clearly points to Catholic devotion and reverence for saints and the Virgin Mary. This also reflects the community's collective expression of faith. Throughout these chapters, Rizal portrays religious devotion as a deeply embedded aspect of Filipino society. This serves various functions, including spiritual fulfillment, community cohesion, comfort in distress, and maintaining cultural identity. However, such religious devotion and piety are often weaponized to mask social issues and injustices. Throughout these chapters, Rizal reveals how elaborate celebrations and religious displays serve as deceptive facades in Filipino colonial society. The ability to maintain elaborate spectacles while simultaneously suppressing uncomfortable truths represents one of the most effective tools through which those in positions gain power and authority. Chapter 29 introduces the theme of superficiality masking societal issues. Piloso Potasio exposes the contradiction between lavish festivities and the unaddressed hinaing ng bayan or people's grievances, revealing how spectacle diverts attention from suffering. This critical lens continues in chapter 30. The overcrowded church presents an image of collective devotion while concealing the religious and economic exploitation through mandatory monetary contributions for the sermon. In chapter 38, the ornate religious procession creates a facade of communal harmony and spiritual fulfillment while deliberately obscuring unresolved injustices, like the disappearance of Crispin and Basilio, who were also under the abuse of the priests. Throughout these chapters, Rizal reveals how elaborate celebrations and religious displays serve as deceptive facades in Filipino colonial society. The ability to maintain elaborate spectacles while simultaneously suppressing uncomfortable truths represents one of the most effective tools through which those in positions gain power and authority. Chapter 28 opens the discussion on the theme of power and authority. The central topic of the newspaper article is the prominent role of Franciscan friars and attendance of influential Spanish figures, including Padre Sibila. The significant authority and prestige held by both groups reveal their dominant position and influence over the town of San Diego and its traditions. This power dynamic becomes even more evident in chapter 29. Don Filipo's fear of opposing the priest despite agreeing with Piloso Potasio's criticisms of addressing societal issues instead of focusing on extravagant celebrations reveals the clergy's formidable influence. This power dynamic suppresses dissenting voices, effectively prioritizing superficial displays over crucial community concerns. In chapter 31, Padre Damaso's deliberate use of Latin and flawed Tagalog in his sermon and his refusal to end the sermon illustrate how language and religion serve as a tool of authority. This effectively reinforces the clergy's power and the subjugation of the populace. Chapter 34 subtly emphasizes social control through symbolism. The lunch table symbolizes the social hierarchy in the story, highlighting how the elite officials, priests, and the rich saw themselves as superior to the lower class. The pronouncements of the priests, such as Padre Damaso, carried more weight and were met with greater deference than those of less influential guests. In chapter 35, the church wields significant authority, creating an environment where even those sympathetic to Ibarra feel powerless to provide support or intervene during his fight with Padre Damaso. The church's capacity to impose spiritual and social consequences intimidates local officials and ordinary citizens into inaction. However, a rare act of defiance appears in chapter 37. The Governor General's support for the excommunicated Ibarra represents a clear attempt by the secular authority to assert its power and challenge the church's pervasive influence. This action highlights the tension inherent when governance and religious doctrines clash, revealing a society where multiple power centers vie for control. Chapters, Rizal meticulously examines how power and authority function within colonial Filipino society. Both the clergy and Spanish officials wield their authority not for the benefit of the people, but to safeguard their privileges and further their interests. When individuals and institutions possess little accountability, the temptation to misuse this power becomes overwhelming. The theme of abuse of power, moral decay, and hypocrisy runs deep across several key chapters. In chapter 28, the involvement of religious figures like Padre Damaso in gambling activities reveals both moral decay and hypocrisy, as they privately engage in vices while publicly preaching virtue. Their frustration at losing money contradicts their supposed spiritual detachment from worldly concerns. The hypocrisy becomes even more unsettling in chapter 29. Padre Salvi being called Papa by the child of a young woman during the procession is a potent and disturbing detail. It suggests abuse of power through inappropriate relationships, moral decay in violated vows of celibacy, and hypocrisy in maintaining a public image of sanctity while privately behaving differently. Moving to chapter 30, the church exploitation of religious beliefs by connecting monetary contributions to salvation demonstrates both power abuse and hypocrisy. Threatening hell for attending secular entertainment like the Comediante reveals how fear is weaponized to maintain control. The pattern intensifies in chapter 31. Padre Damaso's sermon represents one of the clearest examples of moral decay and abuse of power. He abuses his position by using the pulpit to attack Ibarra and his father, displays moral bankruptcy through his vindictiveness, and embodies hypocrisy by using a sacred platform for personal vendettas rather than providing spiritual guidance. In chapter 34, Padre Damaso's verbal assault on Ibarra and his deceased father, met with silence from the onlookers, starkly illustrates the abuse of power. His position grants him impunity to denigrate others. At the same time, the systemic pressure to remain silent effectively enables this abuse, revealing a social structure where the powerful can freely strip individuals of their dignity without consequence. Finally, in chapter 36, the friar's manipulation of Capitan Tiago by forgiving his debt in exchange for breaking his daughter's engagement combines corrupt use of power with moral bankruptcy, while maintaining the appearance of spiritual authority. These chapters expose the profound moral contradictions within colonial Philippine society, shown from the religious figures gambling while preaching virtue, to the disturbing suggestion of an inappropriate relationship with a young woman, the exploitation of religious beliefs for financial gain, and the misuse of the pulpit for personal vendettas. When authority figures openly disregard ethical standards through abuse and moral decay, while demanding compliance from others, they create profound divisions and discrimination in society. The theme of alienation and social stratification is vividly illustrated across several chapters in Noli Tangere. In chapter 27, the treatment of the person with leprosy or ketongin represents one of the most explicit examples of alienation. The people of San Diego actively avoid this individual due to fear and prejudice, showing how illness becomes a basis for social exclusion. Maria Clara's compassionate interaction stands in contrast to this discrimination. The sense of social division becomes more pronounced in chapter 28. The newspaper article reveals clear social stratification at the fiesta, where entertainment is segregated by class. Spanish elites and ilustrados enjoy Spanish performances, while Indios, including Capitan Tiago, are limited to Tagalog comedy due to language barriers, highlighting linguistic and cultural discrimination. Chapter 31 further deepens this idea of exclusion. Padre Damaso's use of Latin and flawed Tagalog in his sermon deliberately creates linguistic alienation. This language choice excludes the majority of the Indio congregation who cannot understand Latin. His specific attacks on Ibarra as a haughty mestizo also demonstrate racial discrimination. The theme of alienation becomes psychological in chapter 33. Elias' confession that he no longer trusts people due to witnessing injustices reveals his profound psychological alienation from society. His statement to Ibarra that having enemies is inevitable when seeking change shows how reformers become alienated from the status quo. In chapter 34, the lunch table seating arrangement physically manifests social hierarchies, with positioning based on status and influence. Ibarra's dignity is attacked, and when he defends himself, he is ostracized, demonstrating how standing up against discrimination often leads to further alienation. Chapter 35 reinforces this with social pressure. The community's fear of supporting Ibarra against the friars shows how alienation operates through social pressure. Those who might sympathize with him remain silent due to fear of becoming targets themselves. Finally, in chapter 38, the contrast between the festive procession and unresolved injustices like the missing sacristans shows institutional alienation. This shows how marginalized people concerns are rendered invisible during public celebrations. Throughout these chapters, Rizal shows how alienation operates at multiple levels: physical, linguistic, social, racial, and institutional. These interconnected forms of alienation and discrimination reinforce the novel's critique of a deeply divided society under Spanish colonial rule. This pervasive experience of injustice, however, ignites a powerful yearning for progress through education. The theme of progress through education takes center stage in various chapters of Noli. In chapter 26, amid festive preparations, Ibarra's primary focus on implementing a school demonstrates his belief in education as the foundation for the town's development and future prosperity. The community's enthusiastic support for this endeavor underscores their shared recognition of education's vital importance. This vision of progress is further symbolized in chapter 32. The machine symbolizes progress through science and reason, reflecting Ibarra's belief in Enlightenment ideals. Its sabotage represents how forces opposed to change actively undermine modernization efforts. Hence, knowledge without moral intent can be destructive, and true progress requires both innovation and ethical purpose. In chapter 33, Elias tells Ibarra that he has enemies precisely because of his desire to create positive change through education, revealing how progress threatens entrenched interests. Ibarra embodies idealism through his conviction that reform through education and infrastructure development can transform society. Even colonial authority briefly aligns with this vision in chapter 37. The Governor General's support for Ibarra suggests that some colonial authorities recognize the value of educational advancement, even as others resist it. Rizal presents education not merely as academic learning, but as a comprehensive force for social transformation. The resistance Ibarra faces in his educational project reveals how knowledge itself threatens existing power structures. This theme reflects Rizal's own beliefs as an ilustrado that education could be the foundation for Philippine progress and eventual liberation from colonial control by fueling the pursuit for reforms and justice. The themes of social reform and justice are also shown through several key chapters of Noli. In chapter 29, Piloso Potashio's critique of lavish spending on festivities while ignoring the grievances of the people represents intellectual resistance against misplaced priorities and social inequity. This idea of resistance through constructive action emerges more strongly in chapter 32. Ibarra's school and modernization projects embody resistance through constructive reform, challenging the status quo by creating new institutions rather than merely criticizing existing ones. Chapter 33 deepens this idea. Elias's conversation with Ibarra reveals the conflict between reformers and the system, explaining that anyone seeking change automatically makes enemies of those benefiting from the current order. The tension escalates further in chapter 34. Ibarra's outbursts against Padre Damaso represents direct confrontational resistance against religious authority, as he defends his dignity and his father's memory. By chapter 37, resistance even comes from inside the system itself. The Governor General's support of Ibarra demonstrates resistance from within the system, showing how even authority figures can challenge unjust practices. In these chapters, Rizal portrays resistance and the pursuit of justice as occurring through multiple channels: intellectual critique, personal defiance, institutional reform, and even alliances with sympathetic authority figures. In the continuing search for justice, Filipinos found an imagined community that fosters compassion and helping among people. The theme of helping and compassion stands out in Noli as a gentle but powerful response to injustice. In chapter 26, the culture of offering a heartfelt welcome to guests, regardless of their status, demonstrates communal compassion as an integral part of Filipino hospitality during the fiesta preparations. The spirit of empathy becomes even more profound in chapter 27. Maria Clara's compassionate encounter with a person with leprosy represents the novel's most powerful expression of empathy, as she transcends societal prejudices to demonstrate genuine kindness toward someone universally shunned. The value of empathy as protective action is revealed in chapter 31. Elias's warning to Ibarra about potential danger shows compassion and demonstrates how empathy motivates protective action. This compassion takes an even more selfless form in chapter 33. Elias's selfless act of saving Ibarra from the taong madilaw, driven by his personal values and kindness, powerfully illustrates that genuine justice and compassion originate from within individuals, transcending mere legal obligations or societal norms. In chapter 36, Maria Clara's family, rallying around her during emotional turmoil, demonstrates familial empathy and support during times of distress. Still in chapter 36, Tia Isabel's anger over the sudden change of fiancé shows her empathetic understanding of Maria Clara's emotional attachment to Ibarra. Throughout these chapters, compassionate acts serve as counterpoints to the novel's portrayal of cruelty and indifference. Characters like Maria Clara and Elias demonstrate how empathy can cross boundaries of illness, class, and circumstance. These themes suggest that even in an unjust society, human connection and compassion remain powerful forces that maintain dignity and naturally inspire reciprocity and gratitude. Utang na loob, a deeply rooted Filipino cultural value, plays a subtle yet significant role throughout Noli Me Tangere. In chapter 31, Elias warns Ibarra about potential danger at the ceremony as his way of beginning to repay his utang na loob to Ibarra, who once saved his life. This act demonstrates how this moral principle motivates protective action and creates bonds between people. This theme continues in chapter 33. Elias helps Ibarra from the danger planned by the taong madilaw. This principle operates as an internal moral compass rather than an externally imposed obligation. Elias' actions demonstrate how a debt of gratitude creates a sense of responsibility toward others. The sense of shared obligation broadens in chapter 35. Don Filippo believes the people of San Diego should support Ibarra because they owe a debt of gratitude to his family for the good they have done for the town. This shows how utang na loob extends beyond individuals to create community obligations. However, in chapter 36, the conflict over Maria Clara's engagement implicitly involves utang na loob, as Capitan Tiago feels obligated to the friars to forgive his debt in exchange for breaking the engagement. This demonstrates how powerful figures can manipulate this cultural value for control. These chapters show that utang na loob functions as both a noble virtue and a potential vulnerability. When authentic, it creates meaningful bonds of reciprocity and care between individuals. However, the novel also shows how this deeply ingrained value can be exploited by those in power to manipulate behavior and secure compliance.
Themes relevant in the present society. Filipino religiosity and piety. The Filipino religiosity is strikingly displayed in its festivals, where Catholic faith and tradition are linked. Filipinos express their devotion by honoring patron saints, commemorating biblical events, and participating in various rituals and processions, exemplified by celebrations like Sinulog, Ati-Atihan, Semana Santa, and Santa Cruz. The oppressive religious control seen in Noli Me Tangere has largely diminished, the centrality of religious identity and practice continues to shape Filipino consciousness, social structures, and cultural expressions in profound ways. Holy Week observances across the Philippines offer a powerful display of Filipino piety and devotion. Hasanakulo, or the Passion Play performances, Pabasa, or the continuous reading of Christ's Passion, and the processions of saints are continued Filipino traditions documented in Noli Me Tangere. Self-flagellation and even crucifixion practices in certain areas, like San Fernando, Pampanga, represent extreme forms of devotions.
Personal religious devotions, such as wearing religious medals, scapulars, or carrying prayer cards, are commonplace across socioeconomic classes. Taxi drivers often display rosaries on their rearview mirrors, while professionals may keep religious icons in their workspaces. Filipino superficiality and neglected needs. The theme of superficiality masking social issues continues to operate as a powerful mechanism in contemporary Philippine society in the form of corruption. Growing consumer culture leads to a prioritization of material possessions and superficial displays of wealth over addressing deeper societal issues and inequalities such as poverty. This mirrors the pagpapakitang tao that Piloso Potasio criticized. Patronage dynamics with politicians and businesses, sponsoring events in exchange for visibility and influence, similar to the colonial power structures that Rizal criticized. Ribbon cutting politics has become a standard practice where government officials prioritize inauguration worthy projects over sustainable development initiatives. Concrete examples are the Build programs focus on infrastructure over immediate social welfare, the cosmetic dolomite installation on Manila Bay, ignoring deeper environmental and poverty concerns, the scandalous 138 million PhilHealth Christmas party amid healthcare struggles, and the deliberate concealment of poverty during international summits like APEC 2015 and ASEAN 2017 in Manila through the temporary removal of informal settlers and the construction of visual barriers. Enduring power structures and authority. Power and authority between religious institutions, government, and economic elites continue to shape Philippine society. Though the Spanish colonial structure has long been dismantled, the fundamental patterns of power concentration and their exercise have evolved rather than disappeared. The patterns of authority concentration is exercised through both formal and informal means, and the tension between established power and reformist challenges remain central to Philippine society and governance. The Church maintains substantial cultural and political authority in the Philippines. Moral authority grants religious leaders significant influence in public discourse and legislative processes, notably concerning issues like divorce. Electoral significance gives the church leadership indirect political power. Various religious organizations can mobilize voting blocs. Educational authority persists through the extensive network of Catholic schools, particularly among the middle and upper classes. The concentration of political power within families represents one of the most direct continuities from the power structures portrayed in the novel. The 2022 elections demonstrated this pattern's persistence with the return of previously dominant families to executive power. Geographic control enables dynasties to treat specific territories as virtual fiefdoms. Many political families also own the major businesses in their regions, creating interdependence between political favor and economic opportunity. Abuse of power and corruption. Corruption in government systems. Misuse of public resources represents perhaps the most direct continuation of the abuses Rizal criticized. The pork barrel system evolved from a legitimate legislative tool into a mechanism for systematic theft of public funds. The 2013 Priority Development Assistance Fund scandal revealed how money was diverted through gross projects and fictitious NGOs. In the present society, agency corruption is evident, such as the 2020 PhilHealth controversy with an alleged siphoning of billions through schemes like phantom dialysis, denying crucial healthcare access during the pandemic. Infrastructure corruption, such as the tongpats or kickback system in construction projects, leads to substandard roads, bridges, and buildings that endanger lives. Abuse in the justice system. Institutions tasked with upholding justice often demonstrate the most examples of power abuse. Extrajudicial killings represents an extreme manifestation of abuse, with thousands of deaths reported during the anti-drug operations. The cotton culture or police extortion, where small workers are forced to pay bribes to avoid harassment or fabricated violations, creates a predatory system among law enforcers. Selective justice is also observed in the Philippines, where legal proceedings move quickly against critics and slowly or not at all against allies of those in power. This padrino or patron intervention in legal proceedings undermines the concept of equality before the law. Lastly, extreme prison conditions such as overcrowding in facilities like Manila City Jail reveal institutionalized abuse and a dehumanizing approach in incarceration. Filipino moral decay and hypocrisy. Hypocrisy in religious leadership. Patterns of predatory behavior by some clergy members are often followed by institutional protection rather than accountability. For instance, the Paulo Kibuloy's alleged use of religious influence to engage in money laundering and sexual abuse, but allowed to run in the election. Moreover, the lavish lifestyles of religious leaders maintained through the misuse of church funds donated by financially struggling congregants highlight a significant impropriety. Similarly, the claimed political neutrality of religious leaders is often belied by their clear partisan entanglements, where they leverage their influence, particularly to protect institutional interests. A disparity in moral outrage shows moral decay, with some religious organizations passionately addressing issues like same sex relationships, but remaining notably quiet on equally concerning matters like economic exploitation. Political and public hypocrisy. Populist performance often masks elitist policy implementation. Politicians who campaign as champions of ordinary citizens while primarily serving wealthy interests exemplify this disconnect. Anti-corruption campaigns and for the poor programs that primarily serve political rather than social purposes demonstrate institutional hypocrisy. Relief goods branded with politicians' names and faces and assistance program timed to coincide with electoral cycles demonstrate the self-serving nature of supposedly altruistic initiatives. Alienation and discrimination. In the Philippines, there are many forms of discrimination, such as stigma against people with psychological and physical conditions. This is congruent with the negative treatment and alienation of individuals with leprosy in the novel. Discrimination manifests in different forms, ranging from social stigma and deprivation in employment, healthcare, or education. Tragically, these patterns of discrimination extends to the LGBTQ community, often compounded by severe stigma surrounding HIV. The inaccurate association of HIV with LGBTQ individuals fuels prejudice, leading to further social association. Workplace discrimination persists despite policy improvements. Women continue experiencing wage disparities, sexual harassment, and promotion barriers, particularly in male dominated industries. This theme arises from the dominant religious institutions' specific teachings and beliefs. For instance, certain ideas within Catholic doctrine regarding LGBTQ issues, divorce, and abortion can lead to the alienation of individuals whose beliefs or experiences differ. Social stratification. The hierarchical society with an equal distribution of resources and opportunities based on social categories continues to be a defining characteristic of the Philippines. In Metro Manila and other urban centers, high concrete walls separate luxury developments from informal settlements. Areas like Forbes Parks and Dasmariñas Village in Makati stand adjacent to densely populated informal communities. Commercial spaces are used as social filters to establish environments that implicitly or explicitly exclude lower income citizens. High-end malls employ subtle tactics like anti-poor architectural designs that signal exclusivity. Moreover, kasambahay dynamics perpetuate colonial-era patterns of servitude. The common practice of requiring uniforms visually reinforces the status differences, while the use of separate eating utensils in some households creates a form of ritualized segregation. Justice and reform. Ibarra's failed efforts to build a school reveal how justice and progress can be hindered by corruption and abuse of power. These issues are present till today. The ICC's warrant against Duterte symbolizes a global push for accountability in the Philippines. Locally, the government's partnership with the EU to strengthen its legal system reflects a growing call for reform. Another recent example is the Senate's ongoing review of red tagging and the human rights violations, which addresses state abuse and pushes for justice for activists. These actions echoes Ibarra's hope for society ruled by fairness, not fear. Compassion and helping. Maria Clara receives emotional and practical support from people around her, Tia Isabel and Andeng showing the Filipino spirit of compassion. In modern times, this compassion is seen in relief efforts for disaster victims, such as community donations and rescue teams during typhoons. The mental health advocacy of youth groups inspired by empathy and shared struggles also reflects this theme. Just like how characters in the novel offer comfort without expecting reward, Filipino continue to help each other during times of crisis, from pandemic aid to community practice. Utang na loob. Ibarra expects support from townspeople counting on their gratitude for his father's contributions. Today, utang na loob influences many aspects of Filipino life, from voting based on family loyalty to community support for local leaders who help in times of need. This cultural norm can be both positive and problematic. While it encourages loyalty and gratitude, it also affects politics through balik utang, where favors are repaid by blind support. Still, it remains deeply rooted in Filipino value, seen even in families abroad supporting relatives in the Philippines out of deep personal obligation. Education for advancement. The belief in education as a primary vehicle for individual and national advancement remains deeply embedded in Philippine culture and policy. Family resource allocation consistently prioritizes educational expenses even under financial strain. Many overseas Filipino workers especially cite their children's education as a primary reason for seeking work abroad. Multi-generational sacrifices reveal the depth of commitment to educational advancement. Grandparents delay retirement to help fund grandchildren's education, or older siblings postpone their studies to support younger family members' schooling. The K-12 implementation represented one of the most significant educational reforms aimed at aligning Philippine education with international standards and better preparing students for employment or higher education. The Universal Access to Quality Tertiary Education Act, or Public Act 1093-1, established free tuition to address the financial barrier for low and middle income students. However, the Alternative Learning System, or ALS, expands educational access to out of school youth and adults who cannot access formal education. However, like in the novel, there are also different barriers to education, including enduring corruption, government inaction, teacher welfare issues, and the infrastructure deficiencies. The declared national priority of education is contracted by regional disparities that persist despite policy reforms.
In conclusion, Rizal's masterful narrative exposes colonial Filipino society's complex dynamics. Religious devotion, while genuine among the people, becomes weaponized through superficial celebrations that mask deep social problems. These deceptive displays are maintained by both religious and secular authorities who prioritize power preservation over public welfare. Unchecked authority inevitably breeds abuse, moral decay, and hypocrisy with the same individuals who enforce moral standards, routinely violating them in private. Such corruption creates profound alienation as those who are different or question the system face exclusion and ostracism, reinforcing rigid social stratification. Throughout this oppressive environment, characters confront the painful gap between idealism and harsh reality. Yet, Rizal simultaneously highlights enduring values, such as family honor, moral principles like utang na loob, and community spirit that offer a counterpoint to corruption and suggest the possibility of a more just society. These themes continue to resonate in contemporary Philippine society, where religious institutions still wield significant cultural influence, political power dynamics often favor spectacle over substance, and social hierarchies persist despite democratic aspirations. The tension between idealism and pragmatism remains visible in development efforts. However, the same values Rizal celebrated, such as compassion and moral obligation, continue to serve as foundations of Filipino identity and sources of strength against systematic challenges, making Noli Tangere not just a historical critic but an enduring mirror reflecting the struggles and strength of the Philippine society today.